Okay. All right, gang. All right. So here we are. We're remember that you were originally scheduled for this Thursday to hand in your papers on the second of the three portions of the course here on the impeachment stuff. But because of the strike that's going to be on Thursday, we've canceled that class, and so I've put off until the following Tuesday for you to hand in your papers, which is going to give you that entire extra time, that whole weekend and stuff, for just polishing, of course, the paper, which you'll have well in hand before that time. But what I want to do today is I want to dig in on the topics that you've been thinking about doing, so we can help hone in on some of the topics, help precise them to make them more interesting for you and a better research project, and so that I can get some good idea of what you're after, so I may be able to figure out some additional sources that you might have, some additional readings and stuff like that that might help you on that particular topic. Now, and then they'll be due the following Tuesday, a week from today. So you have a whole week to do these papers that you've settled on here. Now, as you know, that the headlines or lead stories on the television and on the internet now are of course continuing to deal with the impeachment, the constant discussions of whether the Democrats should impeach him now or whether or not they should, just hang him over with major public hearings until the election. Are the public hearings going to be adequately legally justified by their legislative purpose, or is it going to strengthen the hand of Trump and the various witnesses that they're trying to subpoena if there's no impeachment procedure underway? So those are still dominating all the headlines, and they're directly in the wheelhouse of what we've been talking about here. And now you know that Trump has deployed a full carrier group, a whole battle group of naval vessels into the Persian Gulf to stand by next to Iran for potential direct military action against Iran. And is now, Bolton has been leaking to various media that he's putting together a potential plan of airlifting 120,000 U.S. military personnel to stand by to potentially support an attack on Iran without any particular specification of what it is exactly they've done wrong here, in light of the fact that virtually all the other members of the treaty with Iran, except the United States, are maintaining that they are in substantial compliance with the treaty that they've established on nuclear weapons development. But the Trump administration, let's just say Trump and Bolton and Pompeo, are all engaged in one of their typical kind of self-delusions that they think might be used as a justification for taking some military action against Iran. Now, as you know, Trump tends to use these threats of military force and nuclear war and World War III and Armageddon as simply a negotiating technique, and so that he may be trying to, in a sense, as he said, renegotiate the treaty with Iran, and so he's just threatening total world holocaust to help get him a little leverage in the negotiation. But that's at the front pages, and as you probably know, China, he's now raised by 25% the tariffs on all goods coming in from China, or most of them. He's threatening, I think, another $300 billion worth of goods that he's talking about putting additional tariffs on. He's just completely out of control on this. And the newscasters are now starting to talk about the fact that, there's a new round this quarter, at the end of this quarter, a new round of sale of U.S. bonds, which China is the one usually buying, and therefore giving money to the United States government. And if China were to simply decide that they're not going to buy any U.S. bonds this round, it could send the entire United States economy into a complete collapse. So the brilliant negotiator in the Oval Office now is just treading right along the edge of complete catastrophe, where he kind of thinks that that's a good place to be because it's fun helping him negotiate. And in addition to Iran and China, Pompeo is now in Russia today as we speak, negotiating with Russia, getting absolutely nothing for the negotiations. And he is not even talking about the fact that Russia is specifically accused by the American intelligence community as a whole of having engaged in a massive campaign to thoroughly infiltrate and manipulate the American elections. And so it's not on the agenda this morning in the discussions with Russia. And to not leave out one more country, Venezuela, that they've now got the Venezuelan embassy surrounded by Guaido supporters, the insurgent would-be president of Venezuela. Trump is tweeting out constant assertions that it's time for Maduro to be ousted and thrown out, and wants the military to rise up against him. And yet he's extremely concerned about Russia interfering in the U.S. political system. And so all of that's going on in Venezuela right now. As we come to the point in our course here, where we've covered in the first couple of weeks, we covered the issue of global climate change to begin to lay in the kind of basics of global climate change, so that you've got a handle on kind of the particulars of global climate change, the scope of the threat, the imminence of the threat that's entailed in global climate change. And we've now focused on some of the particulars that are up front, right in our face, over the impeachment issue. And we've raised the question here about the potential connection between the impeachable offenses of Trump in colluding with Russia and its potential links to the biggest oil sale deal in history that he and Putin may possibly be involved together in. And so we're coming to the end of the sort of the second third of the course right now. And we're getting set to have you write about the issues of the impeachment itself. And this is looking toward the final third of the course, where we're going to be tying the activities of Trump that we've looked at, the whole discussion of the potential impeachment, the various candidates for articles of impeachment against him, his potential relationship to global climate change, and the whole history of the development of oil as the source of power for the United States military industrial complex. And so what I want to do today is I want to chat with you about the range of topics that you're thinking about right now, directing your attention to the issue of the impeachment. And whatever relationship you want to have the impeachment have to potentially global climate change. You haven't gotten quite to the issue of the central issue of the indigenous involved in this. You know that the indigenous people were targeted in North Dakota for the major pipelines to go right through their territory, both the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL pipeline, and other pipelines like the Trans Mountain Pipeline is also going through indigenous territory in Canada and in the Northwest United States. We're going to get to that issue starting on, I think, the 24th when we get back, because we're not going to have class on the 17th. So I think that that next class is going to be on the 21st. Starting on May 21st, okay? So we're going to start digging into that. We're going to be dealing with a number of issues we've touched on in the past about the fact that the Bush senior administration, when they, at the end of the Cold War, proposed forming a new coalition, the new North Atlantic, or the new Northern Industrial Alliance, as they referred to it, and potentially inviting Russia to participate in that now that Russia has spun off all of its ethnic provinces. And the relationship that that has to Donald Trump going crazy, trying to keep people of color out of the country, whether they're Islamist people or whether they're Mexican or South American people, and his whole denigration of all of these other shithole countries that he refers to that are clearly racially identified by him. We're going to be dealing with that and dealing with Steve Bannon's kind of overarching strategic analysis that he imparted to Trump when he was there as his principal advisor and was a member of the National Security Council, in which Steve Bannon has asserted that he believes that the fundamental threat to the Western capitalist world is the indigenous people of the world, because they're un-Christian and that they are not supportive of the capitalist exploitation of their resources for some reason. And that we're going to be moving on into that to help give you a kind of a major overview of what the strategic analysis is, if you can actually ever determine that Trump has one. But to the extent to which he has this close working relationship with Steve Bannon, you can get an idea of what Bannon is talking about and what kind of engines their operation right now. So what I want to do today is I want to get an idea of what your thoughts are at the present time about what subtopic of the issue of impeachment that you want to direct your paper to, so that I can get a better idea of what it is you're thinking about. If some of you haven't yet kind of focused on what it is you want to write about, I'd like to have you do that so that I can get some idea of what potential additional resources there might be for you to take a look at. There's tons and tons of stuff flying around about this now, and so I want to be helpful to you on that. So why don't we start? Raise your hands, those of you who have already gotten some idea about what it is that you want to write about, so that we can chat about this thing. And then, okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Good. Now, the rest of you keep thinking now, right here today, because I want you to try to see if you can come up with some good focus for your paper. So let's start over here. What is it you're thinking of doing?
I'm thinking of writing about the history of impeachment and how it's affected how people are handling the potential Trump impeachment.
Okay, how people are handling it. Okay, what's your thesis?
I don't have a fully fleshed out idea yet, but so far I've just been thinking especially about how the Clinton administration and the Clinton really damaged the concept of what impeachment means and the power of that.
So the inquiry that was undertaken against Bill Clinton because of its lack of convincing bona fides, and it seemed like a major hunt for him, that it's somehow undermined the credibility of the impeachment process itself, so that the average citizen might assume that the motive behind any kind of an impeachment inquest is just as invalid as that of Bill Clinton. Is that right? Okay, but so let's keep, so what? I'm just trying to, so assuming that you can show the analogy, and that the people might not have adequate confidence in the impeachment process. Therefore, what are the implications of that?
Well, I see the implications being the Republican Party stating potential impeachment of Trump as just a move of the Democratic Party to kind of, grasp at anything, which is kind of what was seen on the other side during the Clinton impeachment.
Yeah, and therefore, when the Republican Senate refuses to convict him, they're going to be able to suggest that a significant plurality of the American people didn't support him being convicted, and therefore Trump is going to get away with it, and he's going to be the nominee for the Republican Party, and there's a chance that he could win re-election. And so therefore your argument would be that in light of the history of the Clinton impeachment try, that it might not be the wisest thing for the Democrats to actually impeach him, but to continue on and just go into the election and beat him there.
And let him make an example of himself.
All right. Okay. So that topic has been covered. Okay. So any of you, if you're thinking of writing about the exact same topic, then I would suggest rethink it, because we don't want a whole bunch of people writing all about the same thing this time. We want to get a view of, actually what it'll be is kind of a view of your generation of what the different subtopics are that you think are really important on this. Okay, so what are you thinking about?
So I'm thinking about two topics as of right now that I'm still kind of like getting at. The first one is kind of focusing on the Mueller report and like the other three, like the rest of the 7 things that were mentioned in it.
Yeah.
And just kind of going into depth about that. I'm not sure where I would head with that either. Then another thing that I'm interested in is kind of like what happens once he does get impeached. And I don't know if I could write a paper on that. So like what happens to kind of like the government that's like right now, like who would go into president and like how would that affect, how would the general public react and stuff like that. But I'm not sure how I can get that.
Okay, so let's take a look at both of them. The first one is that I think in light of the fact that there are now 800 former U.S. prosecutors who have signed the public letter saying that they believe that in Volume 2 of Mueller's report addressing the issue of obstruction, that whereas Mueller has outlined 10 specific potentially obstructive acts, but that the letter from the 800 former U.S. prosecutors keeps focusing on 3 of them. That you're saying is that there's 7 others that you think are worthy of analysis.
That could be worthy.
Okay.
I mean, they were clearly worthy enough for them to be in the report, so I feel like they should at least be more looked into.
Okay. I would suggest if you go that route of picking topic A that you're thinking about, is that you should try to focus on one of them, at least of the 7, that you think is probably your favorite candidate, and sort of marshal the best evidence against it, or for it, to say that, look, this looks like one that at least should be added to the 4. If in fact the Congress, the House Judiciary Committee is going to be being guided by collective public sentiment, and that this letter signed by 800 former U.S. prosecutors is pointing at 3 of them, you've got an idea that if you look through the other 7 of these, there ought to be at least one other major candidate. And it would be a good idea if you picked one of those and then built the argument around why you think that one is arguably sustainable. Okay? But now the second topic that you are thinking about is that assuming he does get impeached, and I'm assuming you're saying if in fact, well, what happens if he gets impeached? That's what you said. Obviously, you know that he's going to go to the Senate for trial. And that what you could do is take a look at exactly what the procedures are that are established there, elucidate those, because we haven't gone into a lot of detail about what those are. It'd be helpful for you to be able to find that out. And you can do so by looking at the Clinton trial in the Senate. So you can see what the protocols were that were followed, such as the United States Supreme Court Chief Justice sits as the judge passing on procedural matters. The prosecution team comes from the House, et cetera. There are a lot of logistical details and procedural details. And then what you want to do is explore what you think the implications are going to be if he is found not guilty by the Senate. What is it he's going to do with that? And if he is found guilty and Pence becomes president, what do you think the probabilities are that he's going to follow the precedent of Gerald Ford and pardon Trump for any of the federal criminal offenses that he might have committed over and above whatever it is he's convicted of? And you might also, I would suggest, if you go down B route, you want to take a look at what happens if, in fact, there comes a point in time somewhere after his impeachment and prior to his conviction, Trump decides to just resign and walk away like Nixon did, and then leave the office open to Pence, and then Pence can potentially pardon him for things that both were articles of impeachment and things that were not. Okay? And there's one dangling thing you're going to have to deal with in that one is, what about the state charges that the New York State Attorney General is investigating Trump as well, and the D.C. District of Columbia, which is arguably federal. There's a whole, stay away from that because it's a little complex, but you take a look at the one with New York State, because Pence doesn't have the authority to pardon Trump for state offenses, just for federal offenses. Okay? All right.
I kind of have like a rough thesis. I don't know if you want me to read it to you or just...
Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote, contrary to its conclusion, the Mueller report provided substantial evidence that a tacit agreement did in fact exist between the Trump campaign and Russia, implicating both parties as guilty in regards to criminal conspiracy. If recognized, criminal conspiracy is a much larger, complicated, and serious issue than the obstruction of justice charge currently being investigated by congressional Democrats, and would be the lever that would undoubtedly, in a bipartisan effort, remove Donald Trump from office.
Okay, let me see if I heard that right. That this is looking at volume 1, the collusion question, and that I think what you want to do is you want to be very clear, drill down on what it is exactly that Mueller said about that. That he was saying that he was concerned that he might not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the essential elements of the collusion, okay? And that one of the principal ones is the agreement.
Well, conspiracy, nothing.
Conspiracy, exactly right. That he said, look, there's no such thing as collusion, all there is conspiracy. And in order to prove conspiracy, you have to prove, among other things, a formal agreement. And I might not be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but there's also a very rich vein in there. He said, it's important to point out that further investigations by the FBI might well be able to change that. So the fact of the matter is that contrary to what Barr said, and of course contrary to what Trump keeps saying, and what the Senate Republicans keep saying, is they never did say there's no evidence of collusion or conspiracy. He just said that he wasn't adequately confident that he'd be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the essential element of an agreement here. But what you want to do in that, you want to take a look at what the investigations are that have been still delegated to the FBI, because there are a handful of these investigations going on, okay? One of which, of course, is the Rosneft issue. That's all you see is a one-liner saying, oh, well, that issue has been assigned over to the FBI. So what you might want to do there, going down that important road, is to find out what active investigations there are going on by the FBI, and that would include other U.S. attorneys' offices, which is the Southern District of New York. What are those investigations? And there's another one going on, I think, in the Eastern District of Virginia. And there's one going on in Washington, D.C. So you want to take a look at what those, because that caveat that he's got in there of course, there's ongoing investigations which may turn up something that would in fact support evidence of an agreement. Okay, so you want to see what the relationship is between those other investigations and whether they go to the issue of the existence of an agreement or not. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, is that on the first page where he says that?
Pardon?
Did I just because I didn't see that. Is that like
See what?
where he says that there's still ongoing?
Oh, yeah. He says that in volume 1. He says that it's important to point out that there are FBI investigations going on that may develop evidence that will cause us to change this finding, which begs the question, then why did he quit now? If those investigations are still ongoing, there's something happened that caused him to believe that the time was right where he had to come forward with this. But there's still these active investigations going on, so you might want to mine those investigations and see what process might lead to folding those findings back into volume 1 and changing the conclusion.
Yeah, but also I'm a little confused how George Papadopoulos or whatever, he was actively going to London and meeting with that professor,
Yes.
or whatever.
Yeah, the professor.
Just by extent, he's part of the Trump campaign, and they're.
Well, he was actually on the president's National Security Advisory Committee, and then they said he was an advisor, a foreign policy advisor, to him on his campaign, whatever that means. But you want to just take a look at that. So you're going to raise. I hear you're getting ready to raise. Well, wait a second. What about this? Isn't this pretty obvious? And I think you want to be able to make an argument that there are at least 2 or 3 of these acts of collusion, acts of cooperation, acts of coordination, acts of solicitation that you might think you want to make an argument that the Congress should pursue those. They shouldn't get distracted over into just looking at obstruction. They should actually look into the substance of these particular issues because you believe that these are ripe. And what you might want to do, given the brevity of the paper, you can go beyond 10 pages. Did I say 10 pages? You can. Don't worry about the page length if you really get burrowing into a thing like this. But you might want to pick one to say, look at. I think this 1 or 2 acts of collusion or cooperation are adequate to support an agreement, okay? And then be sure to point out that other thing. Moreover, there's these things still going on, all right? And that'd be a good paper. It'd be a good paper. Okay.
I was thinking of doing what is the argument for impeaching Trump and what are the arguments against it. I haven't really worked on it yet.
The big question, the one going on inside the Democratic Party right now. Okay. Now we have to go a little deeper on that because that's pretty well trodden territory. And I don't want you just sort of codifying a whole bunch of stuff that's perfectly obvious floating around here. The principal argument for impeaching him is going to be articulated by Lawrence Tribe. And so you'll probably want to get a look at a copy of his book called To End a Presidency, okay? Because he sets forth a whole series of affirmative things that you'd want to do if you're going to impeach someone, but a whole bunch of caveats as to why you ought to be very careful about doing this. But in light of you have to get his official statements that have been made now, where he says he thinks the time has come when you need to impeach him. Okay, so he has said that now. So that's, in light of all of his qualifications, all of the caveats and everything that he had in his book, he's actually come to the point of saying that. So he's going to be the most solid, responsible source to cite of saying that the impeachment needs to take place and see what his arguments are. And track down all the different times he's been interviewed since saying that and how many kind of flourishes he's put on that. Because he's going to be the rock on that side. And he's perfectly cognizant of the arguments that are being made by Nancy Pelosi, primarily, and by Chuck Schumer, and you will hear being said by Joe Biden of saying that, look, this is going to alienate his base and infuriate them and get them all mobilized and all het up as though they weren't already. And you don't want to do that. And what they're avoiding saying, and I'd like to have you take a look at this thing. What they're not saying, the Democrats aren't saying it, and even Tribe is not saying it. The threats of violence. That you want to find those quotes by Trump where he said that if in fact the Democrats impeach me, there's going to be rioting in the streets. I can guarantee it. And he's also said things like, if they try to impeach me, remember, I have the military on my side, I have the police on my side, and I have the bikers on my side. And you don't want to offend them because they could get very, very bad for you. There's a series of things that he said like that that is kind of an unstated argument on the part of the people who are arguing against impeaching, because there's a threat of actual violence on the part of his supporters, because they would view this as an act of treason. And he uses that phrase. So find the number of occasions on which he's used the word treason for people, impeaching him. All right, and then on the other side of it, there's you don't want to just stick with the kind of, I guess you could just say commonly understood arguments that Nancy Pelosi and the rest are making is, the fact is that if we impeach him, and it's clear that the Senate is going to refuse to convict him, and if they refuse to convict him, he's going to assert that he's been exonerated, the whole thing was a hoax, and he's going to have that to strengthen his probabilities of winning the election. Okay? Now, and so they argue against doing that, but the countervailing argument is, and only a few people make it, Van Jones makes it a number of times, when he says, like, wait a second, when the Republicans went after Clinton and impeached him and put him on trial and he was acquitted, then you would think that would have redounded to the benefit of the Republicans, and it did. Okay, so it would redound to the benefit of the Democrats now, even if they did do that, because the Republicans took over the entire House of Representatives, after they ran the impeachment at him. So this argument that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are saying, oh, how awful it would backfire on us, and they ignore the actual history of what happened to the Republican Party, even though they unsuccessfully brought him to trial in the Senate. Okay, so you want to take a look at those lesser arguments, the ones that are below the surface from the obvious arguments that they're making. Okay, all right, that's a good one. How are your thinking going?
So I'm thinking they're going to do the third one as well, and whether or not to impeach him or not. I think that the structure of my paper is going to go something along the lines of he needs to be impeached because of the risks that he's posing to the planet in terms of climate change. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, I want to do research into the Rosneft deal and see if I can make some sort of claim that he has personal gain from it. Mm-hmm. And then I think that's going to be it. But I really also think an interesting route would be looking into the security state apparatus and how the power that they have had has grown exponentially since 9/11 through these different laws, the FISA courts, and the use of the grand jury. Mm-hmm. I think that could be another really interesting paper, right? Learn a lot. But I think just because of the times we're in, I think it'd be best to make the argument that he needs to be impeached because of his continued investment in a death sentence for our civilization.
That's the big one. That's the big one. Okay, we got to do some good thinking here, you guys, because that's what we're here for, is to try to get you to hear what other folks are thinking, so you can figure out what you want to do.
So I was potentially thinking of doing it on hypothetically, like if, or maybe not so hypothetically, if he was impeached and Pence became president, what his, I guess, entire presidency would look like, what people say is like an ultra-conservative agenda.
That's cool.
So like examining that based on Pence's like political background and his stance on policies.
All right. No, that's a good one. That's a good one because a lot of people haven't thought that far about it. And if Trump were actually convicted, if he's impeached and then convicted, because he isn't removed unless he's convicted in the Senate, okay? And so that even though there's a very low probability that the Republican-controlled Senate would actually convict him, it's worth looking over the horizon to see what would happen with Pence coming in. Would Pence continue all of the outrageous active programs that Trump is involved in, of threatening Iran with attack, threatening to have a war with North Korea, the things that he's doing, the tariffs, et cetera. Would he continue all of those awful programs? And are there any additional ones that he might do because of his kind of extreme, consistent conservatism? And that would be a good place to point out that Trump historically had not always been viewed as a consistent conservative. And he's had positions all over the place, including supporting, abortion and other things. You might point this out, and that the real threat from the right is Pence, and not Trump, because Trump is so erratic and inconsistent in his lack of ideology and his lack of any kind of systemic thinking. That's a good one. And you might, but as a caveat to that too, you want to point out that there is this dangling issue of Pence's relationship with Eric Prince. I want you to take a look at that. That Eric Prince, the founder and CEO of Blackwater International, that you'll see has changed its name a couple times. It changed its name to a thing like OPI or something, and that's now changed its name to the Academy, but you'll track it down. But anyway, he had these set of meetings, and you'll find a bunch about these now. They're writing about it more now, that he had these meetings in the Seychelles Islands with a representative of Putin to discuss the opening of a potential back channel directly between Putin and Trump that would be not overseen by the State Department or monitored by the CIA or anything else, but to set up a completely secret back channel between the two of them. Now, it's important to raise this because I want you to find the history of the relationship between Pence and his family with Eric Prince's family. Okay, Pence's family with Prince's family, to show that there's lots of information around that nothing that Eric Prince does is not known by Pence. And Pence's assertion that he was completely out of the loop on this, he didn't know anything about it, it's directly analogous to George Bush Sr. in Iran-Contra, saying, I didn't know anything about this, even though their meetings were going on in my office between my national security advisor, Donald Gregg, and the people shipping the arms to the Contras. Okay, so go into a little depth like that to take a look at that aspect of it. Okay, all right.
My argument's pretty much like the argument for impeachment on a few different fronts. First off, by refuting the prevailing Democratic kind of moderate that it'll come back to bite them in the election. And I'm going to use kind of election demographics and kind of polls and stuff from the 2016 election, because if you look at the polls, I mean, it's exactly as you say, it's not going to fire up Trump's base. Trump's base is already fired up. And, these people that they're going to fear rally to him are the people who vote anyways. And these are the people who are going to come out to vote at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people forget that Trump lost the general election. Mm-hmm. And that this huge, fervent, well, they're probably ravenous, but they're not as big and ravenous as I think the
modern Democratic Party makes them out to be. And then the further, I guess, pro-impeachment kind of, one on constitutional principle in the Holtzman book. She has a neat little section on kind of how the framers intended the impeachment clauses to be used. So one on constitutional principle, two on the Article 2, Section 3 clause for faithful administration of laws duly enacted. And then three, I think there's enough, having gone through the Mueller report, I think there's enough, and definitely Section 2 on obstruction of justice, there's enough there to, like if you read it, he said, yes, all three, fact points have been met. And, if the prosecutors have said, that there's enough evidence to support that he's committed crimes.
Okay.
And that should be more than enough to impeach. He has committed crimes. The evidence is there.
Okay, now, but I would recommend that you address the issue of the Republicans, the probabilities that the Republicans, no matter how convincing the evidence is that's in the House to support his impeachment, the challenge to whether or not they would convict in the Senate. And if they refuse to convict in the Senate, what are the steps that the Democratic Party should take to potentially target there's 22 Republican senators that are going to be running for re-election in 2020, and there's only 11 Democratic senators. So you check out who those 22 senators are and find out if there's any of those that are going to be in adequate trouble, that it's conceivable that you might get them to vote for impeachment. Because the embarrassment of all that evidence being put in against Trump and having them just woodenly say, no, we're not going to, I will not convict him no matter what he does, is going to be a pretty powerful argument to be made against those people. And take a look at who the candidate is or candidates are to run against that Republican senator. And you might just check out who the Democratic National Committee is targeting of those 22. There's going to be probably 10 or 12 of them. Now, and one final piece on this, just to make it thorough, that is that in order for the Democrats to realize the great bounty that they're planning to get in 2020, say they win the House, say they win the White House and get rid of Trump, and they win the Senate over, okay? Any effort they make to try to pass a Green New Deal is going to be confronted by the filibuster. Okay, and that the Republicans, if they hold enough of those votes, of the 22 of them that are running again, if they stave off to only losing 3 or 4 of those, even if they lose control of the Senate, which they now have a 52 to 48 advantage over. If there are 3 of those, bless you, if there's 3 of those seats that change and the Democrats get control technically of the Senate, the Republicans still have access to the filibuster. And they can stop any legislation from getting passed, okay? And so the bottom line is they're going to have to win 14 of those 22 seats. And you want to take a look at that and see whether you think there's any realistic chance they can do that. Okay, so this is that bounty that the Democrats are all planning to get to have happen, okay? To just evaluate that for us, okay? Now these are high quality papers that I'm talking about you're doing here, but you're displaying the grasp of the kind of basics. So I'm just trying to push you over into a little of the extra territory that you might not have been thinking about before to really make it an excellent work. Okay? Terrific.
For my paper, I wanted to talk about what historical precedent that an impeachment would set for the future and how it would affect future presidencies. And I have a negative impact for impeachment, which is it takes the diverse time away from issues that are happening in this nation and that matters. Yeah, so that's sort of the basis of my paper now.
Okay. So let's take a hard look at that, okay? There is this trope around, oh, if you spend all this time impeaching him, and having these hearings that go to the impeachment, you're not going to have time to do a lot of these other really important things. They aren't going to get to do those anyhow, as long as the Republicans are there. And it's important to face that. And whatever good it's going to do to pass them in the House of Representatives, the Democrats control where they'd be spending the most time figuring out whether to impeach him in the House. That you've got to be careful of being lured into a hollow argument. Is that, if the Democrats forego spending time passing legislation on important issues, which are going to get blocked in the Senate anyhow, then it's a disservice to the American people, because there are so many other important issues that really need to get addressed. And if they're not addressing those, then they're not fulfilling their obligation to their constituencies. But if in fact that the Senate isn't going to pass them anyhow, you have to address the issue of what is the actual value that's been gained, even from their perspective in the Democratic Party. It's not that there is none. They could, for example, say, see, if we had a Democratic Senate here in 2020, we could have gotten these things passed because we could get them passed in the House. Okay, so that's the counter argument. All right. So, but you still have to deal with the filibuster issue, because in the Senate, not only do they have the weapon of being able to retain control of the Senate unless the Democrats win 3 of those seats away in 2020, they have the filibuster, which even as a minority party, they can stop the legislation. And so that has to be part of your computation here, because this idea of the impeachment process, even though as a matter of principle they might do that, and they maybe should do that the fact that it's sacrificing passing this other legislation that the country really needs, you really need to take a hard look at that. You don't want to just say that kind of in a facile way and then be ignoring the fact that they can't get it past the Senate anyhow. Okay? All right, let's do that.
So I have kind of like a broad, guiding question. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to take me, but I want to look at what it would take for an impeachment to result in like a lasting progressive change in governance and in discourse. I've thought about looking specifically at how everything played out with Nixon and how that didn't result so much in a lasting progressive change, and how Reagan was still able to come relatively soon after that with a pretty reactionary conservative agenda and be extremely popular. So I'm thinking about looking at which routes for impeachment would be the most conducive to that, and then looking at the presidential election as well in 2020, how those two could connect, and potentially what the best connection would be to achieve that outcome.
That's cool. Okay, so let's think about that. Now, you do need to remember that when Nixon technically he didn't get impeached. Remember, they voted out articles of impeachment out of the House Judiciary Committee, and they were getting ready to go to the floor of the full House, and it was clear that they were going to pass, and so he was going to get impeached, and they dreaded that more then, because there'd only been the one previous impeachment all the way back to Johnson, back after the Civil War. And so that there was a big dread of getting impeached at all. And so when the Republican leaders came to Nixon and said, you're going to get impeached, they passed the articles out of the Judiciary Committee, and there's enough votes in the House to get you impeached. And so in order to avoid that, you better quit, okay? But the fact of the matter was there was in fact, it was the high watermark of the kind of liberal, progressive counterattack against the national security state, with the impaneling of the Church Committee, and all the Pike Committee in the House, they both were digging into the CIA and its assassination plans and all that stuff that they were doing. There was a huge surge there. And in fact, Jimmy Carter was in fact probably the most liberal president elected, even in counting Franklin Roosevelt. And so your thesis is on difficult ground right there, because he did come in as a very progressive person. He fired 834 people from the CIA. He cut off military aid to Somoza. He cut off military aid to the Shah of Iran. He was doing all kinds of things that were considered were considered a part of the progressive agenda. Okay, and then you're going to have to grapple with the October surprise, because the October surprise attack against him, which entailed not only the attack against him by Casey at least going and meeting with the Hezbollah and getting them to agree to hold the hostages to make him look weak, right? But you're also going to have to deal with, or you should deal with, because you now know about it, and I'll have to help you to figure out where you can find any evidence of this, but the importation of the funds by the CIA through Shackley, who was working in Bush's campaign as the vice president, to attack the other senators, to attack Frank Church and to attack Dick Clark in Iowa, to attack Birch Bayh in Indiana, and to attack Senator McGovern in South Dakota, and attack Alan Cranston in California. That millions of dollars were brought in to attack them by the Central Intelligence Agency. And so that you have to factor in to this computation that you've got going here about how likely is it that there can be a progressive resurgence in the wake of a successful impeachment of Trump in light of the national security state. Okay, and the full I guess dream scenario would be that in the 2020 election, that Bernie Sanders actually defeats Joe Biden for the nomination. That's the full scenario. He's the more likely, but this early on, that Joe Biden has got 41% in the polls, and Bernie's at 15%, and Kamala Harris is the only other one that even has double figures. And, Elizabeth Warren and the others dropped down to 8%, 7%, 6%. And so that you have to carry through your thought, carry your thought through of the potential for a progressive outcome for the impeachment. And the big question here, and this you're going to bump right into it, is what happens when Bernie gets in? Given the power that has been asserted by the national security state infrastructure to oust Trump. Okay? And that's that whole thing with that Epoch Times Spygate thing. Because there's no doubt about it. That a subtext of our class here has been that the power that's being asserted by the national security state infrastructure, CIA, FBI, NSA, all of them, to get rid of Trump, even as much as we might all want him to be gotten rid of. That kind of muscling up of the national security state to all go after a president who is out of line with their agenda. Okay? And so that you're going to have to deal with the agenda of the national security state and how that would assert itself in the face of a potential rise of a progressive outcome of the impeachment, directly analogous to the progressive response in the Jimmy Carter administration to the Nixon impeachment. Okay, but it's a great topic. It's a lot of stuff in there to work with. Great.
So I want to discuss the foreign emolument and how that could lead to his impeachment, and also how being involved with his businesses still can affect it can create a conflict of interest in the sense that whoever decision he makes, it could be in the interest of his companies or it could be in the interest of America, but we won't really know.
Yeah, there's a, let me see if I made a note about this. There's a book around that is called, let's see if I made a note about it, the betrayal, Trump's Betrayal of America, I think is the name of it. And the fellow's, what's the fellow's name? I'll get it to you. Pop a note to me or something. There's a whole book on this, and it's got this massive set of footnotes in it of all the articles that talk about all the different business deals that Trump was involved in and how they've been going on for 30 years and who he's been dealing with and all those things. It's a great piece, and I just can't think of what the guy's name is now. But just get a hold of me, and I'll get that to you. Okay, I've got a copy of it because you might not. I don't want you to have to run around and buy a whole copy of it, and I can get a copy of it to you. Okay, if you just pop over to the office or something. Okay, all right.
I don't have a thesis at the moment, but I wanted to look into the FISA courts. Because I previously didn't know anything about it, and pretty much look into what it exactly is, the process in which it operates, and the precedents that it sets via the investigation into Carter Page, and potentially the uses against political dissidents that may occur after that.
Far out. That's far out. Okay. The FISA court really sucks. You can start out with that under assumption. That Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, you know, I mean, it's shades of the Palmer raids and all that kind of stuff. And what it is, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed by the right-wing elements in the Congress to authorize warrants that do not meet the Fourth Amendment standard. The Fourth Amendment standard of you having to have probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed before you can invade the privacy of a person, you know, to investigate their papers or their home and the FISA warrant, the FISA court is a group of hardcore right-wing Republican judges that are in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And the FISA court, you'll find some great articles on this. Of the FISA warrants, I think the last time I checked on it, there was something like 4,162 FISA warrants requested, and like 4 had been denied. You know, and what the standard is that all it is needed to get the court, the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, to grant a warrant to place under surveillance, which includes not just following them around and taking pictures of them and searching through their garbage, but, you know, wiretapping their telephones, doing breaking into their homes and placing electronic listening devices in their toaster